Good afternoon, dear guests. My name is Sergei Kopkov, and today I will moderate the showcase city, how to get rid of the grey belt for megacities. At today's Moscow Urban Forum and other forums and in talks between residents and stakeholders, the topic of redevelopment is quite frequent. And what will be different? Today we will see a number of presentations where leading international and Russian experts will share their experience of regenerating industrial territories, and we will try to find out what were their challenges, what mistakes were made, what were lessons learned, and what positive experience we can scale for the cities of Russia and megacities of the world. Today we will have Piotr Lawrence, Vice President of the International Society of City and Regional Planners, ISOCAR, and Architect of the City of Gdansk, Ruben Arakinan, Head of Wall Bureau, Sergei Tukhanov, Head of Bureau T+T Architects, Nikita Malikov, Head of Malikov Architectural Bureau, and every speaker will have 6 minutes to present his interesting and most exciting projects, and then we will start our discussion. I would like to give the first word to Piotr Lawrence, Vice President of the International City of Society and Regional Planners. Piotr, can you hear us?
Yes, hello, I can hear you. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me and see me clearly. Just to reconfirm. Yeah, I hope everything is okay. So good morning, everybody. It is my great pleasure to be part of the Moscow Urban Forum in this edition. Actually, the topic which is subject of today's discussion is of great interest to me. It's very much in line with my both professional and theoretical research. Especially that my entire life I have been dealing with the large-scale urban projects here in the city of Gdansk, but not only here, also in some other cases. So I would like to focus a little bit on the experiences of my hometown, which is the city of Gdansk, which as the post-socialist city was actually going through the hard ways towards reinventing its urban structure and implementing these projects. Just for information, we have quite a few of the projects which are underway or which are under completion, but also we have a lot of the projects which are at their inception stage, and also there is even more spaces which can be translated later on in future into some new urban projects. The first thing which is very important about that is that all of those changes are coming not just because we want to change the city, but it comes from the fact that the industry and the port activities and the military type of land use are actually changing, which means that the ports structures are being relocated into some new areas, into the deep water terminals, so the former port and shipyard areas are getting abandoned. At the same time, we have former factories being abandoned as well, because the production has been relocated into some other areas. And also we have the historic army complexes, which have been left over because basically the army activities have been concentrated in some other areas. So these are the 3 main types of the sites which are under discussion. They not necessarily form a kind of comprehensive belt, so it's not really like in case of Moscow when you have this kind of industrial belt around the city, or you used to have an industrial belt around the city. But at the same time, I mean, it doesn't matter that the shape is different, but what is very important is that that these areas, which actually forms belts or centers or clusters, I mean, this can take very different forms in the different city. Actually, that these areas can be considered as the key resource for sustaining the development of the city. Where does it come from? You know, the sustainable city is a compact city, which means that instead of going outside to the outskirts of the city to build new structures, we actually are reusing or recycling urban space. It's a very important, it's a very old story, nothing innovative, but still many people are forgetting about that. This is the way how we sustain our cities. Many of these places have very special features. They have very special characteristics. They are not the same everywhere. Every factory, every site has different identity. I can still remember when I was on the jury for the Sierpi Mowot factory in Moscow for the large-scale urban competition for that. It's a couple of years ago. We were discussing the special urban identity of this particular site. So I would like to stress that this is a very important feature of that. It's not that we are entering a kind of empty field or empty brownfield, as we can call it, and building just new structure. But what is very important is that we have to reinvent the history of the site. We have to use the tradition and a lot of the different features which are associated with the site identity. What is also important is that there is no blueprint regarding the future of those industrial sites. There can be very alternative futures for these industrial belts. We can reinvent them as the new urban quarter. This is the case of the project Garnizon in case of Gdansk. I'll be happy to provide more information on that in case necessary. There could be some new green areas, which also happens, that we are actually converting the historic industrial or brownfields sites into the green and recreational areas. But also we can invent or reinvent these areas as the new city center structures or multi-use kind of structures. A good example of that is currently under development the case of the Young City in Gdansk, which is the former historic Gdansk shipyard area. But also, what is also important is that some of these areas can get reindustrialized, which means we shall not forget that we need spaces for industrial production in the city, and some of those historic industrial areas can become a home for the new industrial activities. So I would say there is no single blueprint for transforming these areas. There is no single truth about that. We have to take these spaces as the part of the comprehensive urban development strategy of the city, and the future for these sites should come from that. But what is important that is on the other side, it also comes from the intentions of the site owners, and the land ownership is a very important factor in this discussion, as well as is also very important to take into account the opinion of the general public, of the stakeholders, of the community of the city. Just yesterday, I was speaking in Skolkovo as a speaker for the course for city leaders, architects, and so on about public participation. This is very important feature, and it is very important regarding the future of these sites. So these have to be taken into account. And also what is important is that in some cases, the interests of the economic leaders, the interests of the municipal leaders, the interests of the general public may be in conflict. And it all depends on that, how these things will be mediated and what is in the best interest of the city as the general thing. So just to summarize my short intervention, I will need to say that there is a big need for large-scale and comprehensive planning. We should not focus only on the urban design or large-scale architecture. It is important to make these sites attractive. It is important to provide interesting and fascinating and eye-catching urban design and architectural solutions. But it's even more important to think in a comprehensive way about the future of the city and the particular sites. I hope I use my time efficiently. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to this fantastic audience. Thank you.
Piotr, thank you so very much. Your opinion was very exciting. Now I would like to hand it over to Sergei Trukhanov with a vast experience of implementing a project in Moscow. Sergei, in your portfolio you have a number of project of developing the past industrial territories. So what were the lessons you have learned for yourself, and how were the projects different from each other? What new trends do you see in Moscow, and what's the change? What's changing in your relations as a creative or architects bureau and the stakeholders? Hello, everyone. Sorry for being for contacting you in a remote format. Our lesson number one, and meanwhile I'm launching my slides. And so in terms of redevelopment, no matter what the scale of the project is, the scale of the problems may be very different. You probably all know this curve very well. We tried to understand the correlation between the scale of a project and the scale of problems. If we want to transform an area in the city, so are we obliged to get on projects like ZIL or Serpomolot, as mentioned by Peter? And we understood that that's not necessarily. Quite often, smaller or medium-sized project can transform, can completely rearrange the area, the territory, mainly for the better. And today I would like to comment on two projects we implemented successfully. Studio 8 is a residential area borough, and this year we have 6 years, and we can evaluate and reflect on whether the concept of live and work proved. So the project started with the situation that we had almost ruined low-rise construction at the bottom of Triumph Palace. This was how the territory looked like at the moment we started on the project. It was closed and sort of marginal territory, which had negative associations with no social activities, and the tire service was probably the only white spot. So the first thing we did, we let people in. We included transit that allowed this area to work at full scale in future, because if we look at the map, this area is in the middle of residential construction, and we cannot account to attract any traffic from Leningradsky prospect. So to get traffic, we had to get local communities involved, and we found local attractors like Chapayevsky Park and Ring routes, and we allowed all local residents to enter, and the traffic was pierced through by social activities. We were trying to attract local residents, and we couldn't do without a nice legend and nice story. And our next to the area was Dolnik settlement, and we decided that the pattern of feelings when you are in this artist's settlement was based on the complete absence of the urban environment, and we decided to transform it to our neighborhood, also with low-rise buildings, trying to create such a human feeling of this environment. And it was actually, it proved to be the precondition of the success. And the result was having cozy streets with the good penetration, the possibility to walk through between residential buildings and public infrastructure. And talking about the social meaning, we were based, as I said, on the concept of live and work, and we were very careful in choosing the residents. First of all, we preferred those who wanted to place businesses and at ground floors, so this tattoo salon and gastric paradise were among the most creative clients, and you have the owner living here with a nice studio, with a nice view, and they chose the most exciting building in the compound. So we attracted businesses, services, commercial tenants, and it was very helpful to produce a desire to walk around the territory and shape the local community. And we called it the neighborhood institution in the 21st century. It was the story where we managed to get local residents involved into the life of the community. Yeah, just not to waste your time, that's a video which will actually open what's going on. And the second side, we just finished, and we'll still have to test our hypothesis on how it can transform the area around it. It's an office compound, a multi-space, an office building, which is at the boundary of the residential area and an industrial cluster. So it was disputable, a marginal environment, and it took long to launch some business activities there. We also have a residential compound being built there, so the territory is diverse, but our customer really accounts for in dialogue with the municipal administrator, that the area will be transformed. So that is how it looked like back in 2004 when we started to work on the project. So it doesn't look as anything standing out. It's a brick we put inside. But talking about what we have around, so this dissonance with the first Tupeninskaya street and the first Tchaikovsky side street, and thinking on what could really launch the project and make it interesting for the people around us. The legend was that the project was intended to be and will be the new face of office technologies, where we will give the social functions to a big area, and this idea was used for designing for street facades. We tried to provide to make ground floors and backyards visible. So this was how the site was constructed. Pictures in the spring, in early summer. As for changing the facade, it wasn't a dramatic change. We rather put things in order to make it more harmonic, less chaotic. We started to work with the interior and exterior design, so at night you see interior design that supports the exterior design, so this is an evenly distributed pattern in the facade. As for penetration, it was only the case with the ground floor, but vertically some attractions with the street lamps, an open ground floor, which became available for all our residents and outsiders, and the backyard. So maybe this project will not be the driver for gentrification of the entire area, but it will be a brick on the long way of transforming this industrial neighborhood. Thank you. I hope my cases were interesting and you found them useful.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Your cases are really very interesting and very different, and we hope that our public and the participants of our discussion were very interested in your cases. And now from online we move to offline, and I have a question to our participants. Mr. Araklan, you have a lot of interesting projects. I have examined your portfolio, and one is connected to the former plant of Semashka on Sergei Radonezhsky Street. How do you integrate your projects, and how do you integrate public spaces dedicated to the dwellers and also to those who lived near industrial sites and plants, and they were not allowed to access this site, and now this territory is open. It is a new part of the city. How can you find the new mix between new dwellers and those who have been living there for a long time without those new neighbors? Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your invitation. The topic is really very interesting, and I will talk about the background, because the question is more profound than just the question of one territory. We have this grey rust belt, and the developers are trying to find the resources to intervene into these zones, and sometimes it is allowed to do something and sometimes not, especially if we have architectural monuments, historical monuments, etc. So in this case, we need to find ways to have profit. And we have the hard part related to the design and to searching the needed tools to have such a design which would attract new city dwellers, and the soft part, which is related to classifying territories and looking at how different social groups can interact, and we need to vivify such zones, and architectures should communicate with developers and with the city. In the case of Sergei Radonежский, the story is more complex, because the developer had not one site, but 3 and even 4 sites, and it was quite a challenge for a developer to unify those 4 sites. So that's why I would like to share our experience, how we were developing this part of the city, which is located near 4 metro stations in Moscow. And historically it was in possession of Semashka plant. It was a medical equipment and medication plant. And so how can we unite these sites, and what tools should we use to allow city dwellers to access these territories, and how we can integrate them into the city territory. Our project is called Pangaea. Pangaea is the name of the supercontinent that existed at the end of the Paleozoic, and you can see 4 sites which are united into one super city, and they're located in different places in Moscow. You see the interventions with different sites on Yaoza. It is located near Rimskaya, Taganskaya, Baumanskaya. And one more metro station. So the territory is not homogeneous, and we know that each part of this territory has its own identity, but we want them to be parts of one unified project. And we wanted people to understand that this part of the territory located near the Rimskaya metro station is the part of the same project as the lot near the Baumanskaya metro station. So we designed it as one city, as a unified city. The scenario of people mobility with macro and micro surfaces and areas is the same for all the sites. We have some open spaces, pools, swimming pools. So At the same time, each site has its own landscape, its own identity, its own DNA. And as there are a lot of buildings which belong to the cultural heritage, we were adopting the approach of acupuncture, I can say. So we tried to reform the layout inside the buildings and outside the buildings. We were searching for cold and warm zones of activity. So cold zones are those where there is not so where there are not a lot of activities. And the Semashko plant was dedicated to generating medications, and now we are talking about generating a healthy environment and lifestyle. So this story, this scenario was the basis for all the 4 zones. And now they are parts of one super city with different spaces, and it is accessible for pedestrians. And afterwards we separated these 4 sites, but the principles they are based on are the same. For example, in the site near the Rimskaya metro station, we opened the Gzhelskaya street, and you understand that the design of a building is the same that the design of another building located near another metro station. So first of all, we need to understand that now the territory is open, and we are cleaning everything up, and we have what we call a brick carpet, and you can find there different materials, and it is really very pleasant to walk on. You also can see stucco on buildings, facades, and also where different finishing and lining materials are old-fashioned, we replace them with stucco or other modern materials. You can see a series of visualizations. The project is being carried out, and we remove fences, we clean up the territory, and now we have such enclaves with very powerful economic interventions. Thank you very much. That's all for me. Thank you very much, Ruben. It was a very interesting project, and to save time, we will start our discussion after all the presentations. That's why I would like to address Nikita Malikov. Nikita, your colleagues have talked about different projects in Moscow or in other capital regions, and I know that you have a lot of experience working in Russian regions. What are the characteristic traits of your work in the regions, and how can you carry out a high-quality project, taking into account that the resources are limited? What projects can you implement? Well, Moscow and Russian regions are quite different, and we know it very well. And I'm talking now about history, about management, government, about economy. So people are similar. We cannot say that people are different in Moscow and in the regions, because people can love, people like to eat, to meet with each other, etc. So they are quite the same. same, but the expenditures are different. And I like the word of redevelopment, and I like this prefix re, because we can redo, review something. But in our regions, sometimes redeveloping means not the does not mean the concept of reusing something, but it means that we will remove everything and build something from scratch. So here you can see the industrial zones. Now they are industrial plants or other industrial zones. And you can see also free zones available for construction. And if we have all the colors together, you can see what we have. And we also have two circles. The red industrial zone we can renovate, and the blue circle is the new construction. As the red and the blue ocean. You know this book, maybe. And if we want to build from scratch, the expenditures, the costs will be less. 40,000 for the new construction and 50,000 for the redevelopment. And in the regions, you know that all the reasonable people will choose the first notion, because for the regions this difference is quite touchable and quite important. In Moscow, sometimes we can work with what we have and not remove everything and build from scratch. And it is important sometimes to create a symbolic building or site, and any regional town or city wants to have tourists from Moscow who will bring money to the region. I cannot say that it happens like that always. Well, I would like now to talk about a sewing plant, and now this site is lettable. We as a developer and as economists, we wanted to create something unique. We are inspired by a lot of projects realized in Moscow, and we examined the style of Moscow projects, and we came to this territory. We said that, well, everything is ruined and we need to remove everything, and we will build from scratch. We were focused on the medical businesses because we have now a private medical center and a food court. This project is not the most modern one. It is 5 years old. But you know, in 2015, the economic situation in our country changed drastically, and you all know why. And so we adopted a new direction of development, because if the economy started to stagnate in Russia, it does not mean that the development of our projects should have stopped or should have started to stagnate too. And we started to attract businesses, and it was very interesting for different people. We organized different polls and surveys of public opinion, and afterwards we moved to redevelopment, and we bought different buildings from 500 to 5,000 square meters, and using not so many resources, we could redevelop them. And the city did not change, and people could still use the paths and roads they were used to, but we just added food courts and other attractions. So we were focused not on the economy but on the consumers. In Tyumen you can see another example of our work. We were focused on working with barmen, and we created a unique project including the work of barmen. Investors were ready to invest, and they were ready to adapt to this symbolic or key solution. You know, the dwellers of regional towns and cities are not always ready to see the whole redevelopment of a part of the city. In Tyumen, the investor said, well, I will restore this building, but the street is ruined, and we can restore also the street. And it is very comfortable for the town dwellers, and they are willing to invest themselves if this approach is comfortable for them. And so, in this case, we approached this sewing plant once again, but our approach changed, and we asked ourselves, why should we eliminate this plant? We can just redevelop it. But in 2019, it was the turn of the pandemic, and we stopped our project. We were trying to understand what we can what we can do in the future, and there was a new creative cluster called Rails, which opened its doors, and during the first day after its opening, there were a lot of people there. And we see that after the pandemic, people really want to communicate, to meet with each other. And we based our new approach on this idea. It is not really a creative cluster. This is a cluster for communication. We have introduced just one or two new buildings. We redeveloped this territory and we started to work with it. We focused ourselves on the communication between people, and you know, some technical details, facades, windows was not in the focus, in the center of our attention. And people understood that we communicate with them, and they were ready to work with this territory. Then we moved forward, and we had an integration with children, so we carried out redevelopment which was clear to children. You know, children are those who will make use of these buildings and territories in the future. That's why we decided to focus on them, for them to understand how they can interact with these sites, a lot of public places. So it is more about the renovation of mind than the renovation of buildings. You know, we used this approach of minimal investments and also the approach of a very close communication with citizens. We are sure that the redevelopment will move from the regions to Moscow in the future, because in small towns the communication between investors and the government and the citizens is closer. And as I've said earlier, citizens are even ready to invest themselves to see how their streets and buildings are renovated. And it is not a brand new town.
Thank you, Nikita. Thanks for all our speakers. And we have a number of questions from people who see and listeners, please let us know how can we efficiently use the past buildings in redevelopment. What could be the useful features we can find in the existing compounds, how to keep those unique traits, how can you fill with new lives buildings left in industrial areas. In terms of economics and architecture, the service sector is the most flexible. It can be used for redevelopment. So we have a bureau, we have the rule of the hand. So actually the ground floor and the first floor. And in service sector, they are not picky. They are ready to use all possible forms. But the residential sector is not that flexible, but it's most attractive in terms of investment. And we look at the number of forms when we try service sector to enter, to earn money, to make some money and reinvest in residential area. Then we get a multifunctional space residents are used for. I believe our experience is a little bit different. So retail, people are not that interested in retail in Moscow, and the development says that creative clusters enjoy much demand. And our development for a tenant, for an anchor tenant like Yandex Food, it's not like Kazbekov Kus or Kusville. It's a different sort of retail. And they could be architectural workshops or dance studios. They allow the small business to relaunch the territory because the area is small and the rental fee is small. It's essential because with the residential it pays with years because it takes long to get residents to the city. So to start a territory, especially where you have to only change the layout. So I think the creative areas are a good solution. So any one of our guests connected online, would you like to comment? I don't think so. Okay, Ruben, then I would like to be based on your last presentation. We need to answer answers of our questions of our listeners. So Maria Belayev is asking, what's the factor for the future development of Moscow? Is there a possibility of theme neighborhoods and districts to be developed? Well, I believe that having a theme ghetto is not the right option. If you get a professional cluster in one way, the other side of the city will die. So that was the experience of 1970s when we get the marginal ghettos. I believe the mixed use would be the right way, where you have a mix of different professions and classes. And a theme cluster is like a historical ghetto. I believe that the city should ideally move away from this. And Nikita, I fully agree with that. It's essential to develop links between different things, different groups. We have a cult of children and the cult of food. No matter what the cult is in 20 or 30 years, we need to aggregate it all. It's not possible to mix everything because you have contradicting functions, like medicine doesn't go well with the pubs and the bars, but for diversity you need to really filter tenants. As Sergei Trukhanov said, you shouldn't give access to premises to everyone. everyone. So, in my opinion, if we would talk about Moscow after the pandemic, you will have to invent another Moscow, a new content of neighborhoods with social framework and our research center in MQ.
People are now spending a lot of time at their places and in their city in the part of the city, and that's why they are also very interested in different new services. And our discussion has come to an end, and I thank you very much for the presentations of your projects, and thank you very much, and let's meet more often. Thank you very much. Thank you.